Hi, my name is Tori, and today I'm going to tell you about some things that I wish I knew before I quit my 9 to 5 job and became a full-time artist and illustrator. Um, and I think the things that I'm going to tell you about today don't just apply if you want to be an artist, but anybody who wants to be self-employed full-time. I think this information will be super helpful for you. Just a little bit about me before I get into that. My name, like I said, is Tori, and I am an artist and illustrator full-time as of last year. But before that, I was doing it part-time for about 5 or 6 years, off and on. And as far as the work that I do, or as far as like the work that I did in my 9 to 5, I was usually some kind of an educator. So working either with students or even working with like adults to teach them various skills. Sometimes it was like art skills, sometimes it was math skills, sometimes it was like technology skills, whatever I was needed to do, but usually doing some form of education for the last 10 plus years. That's what I was doing. But I have always loved art. I've always been an artist at heart, and I have wanted to do art full time for myself for quite some time. And so last year I quit my 9 to 5 job and became a full time artist. And I'll definitely say that like I have enjoyed doing this full time. It is very, very rewarding. And maybe in a separate video, I'll talk about like the benefits of being a full time self employed individual. But for today, I want to tell you about what I maybe would have done differently, knowing what I know now, before just quitting my job and becoming an artist full time. What I want to talk to you about can be broken up into four main bits, which is timing, debts, stress, and maybe I'll say like family relations or like relationships. So those are like the four things that I want to talk to you about. Now, because I am someone who doesn't like being talked at for a long time, I am going to be coloring. And so just if you want to have something to look at while you're listening to me, you can. Otherwise, you can just be doing, whatever chores or things like that you have around the house. And then we'll just get right into it. Okay. So for today, I am going to color this picture. Like I said, I am an artist, so this is something that I drew, but it's also something that's available if it's something that you're interested in. I do think that like drawing and like coloring is really, really therapeutic, so I always encourage people to do it, but whatever kind of self-care is important to you, would encourage you to keep that in mind as you are thinking about transitioning to doing, whatever it is that you're trying to do full-time. I'll also warn you, as you might see, that I do talk a lot with my hands, but hopefully that'll stop pretty soon once I start drawing. So the first thing is about timing, like I said. So when I'm talking about timing, I'm talking about when I quit. So just for some context, I quit in August. And now, to be fair, I had been giving my company like hints beforehand, but I didn't really tell them that I was quitting. I just told them that I was like not happy with where I was, which is a conversation for another day if y'all are interested. But basically, I just, I actually quit really suddenly. I quit on a Tuesday at 4-something, like 4:10 p.m. And my workday usually ends at 5. And I was like, by the way, today's my last day. And again, there's bigger context for why I did that, so I don't really regret it. But if I were to do this again, I actually wouldn't have quit at all. I actually would have let myself get fired. And I know that sounds like a crazy thing, especially because I wasn't actually particularly in danger of being fired, but I would have put myself in a position to get fired if I were to do this again. And I actually had been talking to a career coach at the time who told me that I should let myself get fired. And I'm not a patient person, so I can't put up with that. Once I decide that I don't like where I am, I have to go. So that's me. But if I were giving advice to someone else, and if I were trying to do this differently, or if I was trying to tell someone how to be different from me, one of the things that I would tell them is, if you have the patience for it, you should let yourself get fired. Now, this is usually a longer, more drawn out process, but the reason that I'd recommend that you let yourself get fired is because when you get fired, as opposed to quitting, they usually have to give you, or they're likely to give you, some kind of money extra. Now, maybe it's not a lot, but it's enough. Usually so that they're like, don't complain to us later, or like, don't say that we ever, that we're an unfair company or whatever. Like, it's basically hush money type stuff. Now, not all jobs do this, but, it's something that you might be eligible for. And so it's like, it's part of the benefit of just being patient and just being a difficult employee so that they will fire you. The other benefit, though, is that you can qualify for unemployment if you were fired rather than if you quit. You do not qualify for unemployment if you quit. Now, for me, that wasn't a super, super big deal because I did have some money saved. But if I were getting money from unemployment plus having my money saved, then my savings would have lasted a lot longer. And it just would have like minimized the stress of transitioning to being full-time self-employed. So that's definitely something to consider. Now, I will say that, like, you know, allowing yourself to get fired doesn't mean like start cussing people out at work or like throwing things or things like that, because especially for unemployment, it should not be considered your fault that you got fired. So instead, just start, you know, being a little bit more stubborn, like saying things like, I'm not going to take on extra work, or I don't want to do that project. It seems really stupid. Or, you know, like just being really vocal about what you don't like because you don't plan on working for them again. So it doesn't really matter if they fire you. But then even if they don't fire you, because you are saying no to extra projects and extra work, your workload should get a lot easier. And that should make it easier for you to, if you are still working like your full-time job while you're working on self-employment, you should have a lot more energy for like the side projects and things that you're interested in, even while you're working your full-time job, because you're not giving all of your energy to this full-time job. So that's one thing to consider. Another thing about timing, though, is if you do quit, so like let's say that you did not go the firing route, or maybe even if you did, the time that you should aim to be leaving your job is also something that I didn't consider. You know, I was more so thinking about like, oh, there's like all these things coming up, like all these events that I want to take part in. So if I'm going to quit my job, I should do it now rather than later. And what I was not thinking about was my healthcare. So when you quit your job, you will usually still have healthcare for like the rest of that month. So if your job is giving you healthcare, I would recommend that you quit at the beginning of the month. So like the first of the month rather than like the 12th of the month, because legally your healthcare must continue for the whole rest of the month. So if you quit on the 1st, you will still have healthcare, you know, all the way through the rest of the month. Whereas like if you quit on the 12th, you'll still have it through the rest of the month, but that's like not nearly as many days. You have lost out on days of healthcare. And healthcare, at least in my area, is really, really expensive. So just the more time, I guess, you have before you have to start paying for healthcare, the better. Again, wanting to save as much money as possible for as long as possible before you start bearing like the full responsibility for all these expenses will really, really help you out. Another thing, though, is that, you know, not just quitting like at the beginning of the month, but also if you can manage it, waiting until like November or December to quit your job makes a lot more sense, because usually that's when open enrollment starts. So that's when technically you could sign up for healthcare any time of the year, right? It doesn't have to be, you know, on any particular day. You can sign up for healthcare at any time. But healthcare prices are cheapest when healthcare companies are expecting most people to sign up for healthcare, which is usually like at the end of a calendar year going into the next year. That's when people are usually switching their healthcare plans. And so that's when they're offering like the most affordable rates. Outside of that time, healthcare can be hundreds of dollars more per month. So do not make the same mistake that I did and quit, you know, in August when you're super far away from open enrollment, because it's going to cost you a lot more to get health insurance coverage. So something to keep in mind there. So just to recap, the 3 main things for timing are, if you can, and if you have the patience to do this, let yourself get fired rather than quit, because you need to be eligible for unemployment benefits. And so your own savings will stretch a little bit farther as you're switching to being full-time self-employed. The next thing is to, if you can, quit at the beginning of a month rather than midway or towards the end of the month, so that any healthcare that your job or any other benefits that your job are providing you will last until the end of the month. So you get like an extra 30 days of free healthcare or, you know, whatever, before you have to start paying for it for yourself. And then 3, if you can manage it, try to wait until like November or December so that you are signing up for healthcare when it's at its cheapest. And so again, so that you're saving as much of your savings as possible when you're transitioning to full-time self-employment. The next thing is debts. If you're really lucky, you don't have any debts, and then this is not even an issue for you, but I definitely did, or do still, have debts. So before I quit my job, I had a car payment, I had a credit cards, and I have student loans. I don't have the car payment anymore. I made sure that I paid that off before I quit my job, so that's one less thing to worry about. And I had actually paid it off for a couple months beforehand. But I'll give you some tips about like how I did that. Ooh, that's a really pretty color. Okay, so just generally for any debt where like they have big interest rates, and so like, the debt builds up really fast. There's two main things that I'd recommend that you do. One is to help you pay them off faster, but two is that when you are actually like the moment that you decide to quit your job and you are starting to transition to full-time self-employment, there's some things that you could be doing. So if you are able to pay the debts down, or if you're trying to pay the debt down, one tip is that especially if you have a really high interest rate, or if you owe money to like multiple lenders, like, oh, I have a credit card and I have a car payment and I have, whatever. Two things that, or something that you can do is that you can refinance your loan. So just Google this, or go on like NerdWallet is a website that I really like for this type of stuff. But you can go on there and, put your information in and then just see like what other offers. Because one of the main things that a lot of credit card companies get you on is that your interest rate is really, really high. So if you can get another company to say, hey, you can pay us instead and it'll cost you this much less per month, you can save a ton of money. Or even if you just have like multiple debts and you just want to pay one bill a month, you can save a lot of money that way. So refinancing is a really, really big option, and that's how I was actually able to pay off my car payment. Before, my interest rate was stupidly high. It was like, I want to say like 20%, which is like criminal. And I didn't find this out until actually I took a financial literacy class. But unfortunately, dealerships like to take advantage of a variety of people, is how I will say that. They like to take advantage of people. And I didn't know better at the time. So my interest rate was really, really high, and it was so hard to make the payments each month. But once I took this financial literacy class, I was able to get a much lower interest rate. It was like 4%. And I was able to pay it off in no time. And it made so much of a difference. One, to actually have the title to my car in my hands, and now I actually own it for real, and not just like borrowing it from a bank, basically. But two, I was able to, actually I want to make it yellow. But two, I was able to, one, not only do I own it, but two, that's one less expense that I have to pay each month. So now that I can redirect that money towards like other things, whether that's like other bills or just like, living a better, healthier, happier life, because I'm not stressing about this bill anymore. So that's one thing, is that you can refinance and like really lower what you're paying each month for a particular bill. And refinancing can also be used to combine multiple debts into one. They call it like debt consolidation, which similarly can help make it a lot more affordable if some of them had really high interest rates and some of them didn't. If you can get them all to like one lower interest rate that you're paying all at once, it just makes life a lot easier. So something to consider there. But the other thing when it comes to debts, and this probably applies for cars as well, but I didn't do this, so I can't speak to if it would work the same way. But something that I wish that I knew early on, because again, it would have saved me some money, is that the moment that you leave your 9-to-5 job and you switch over to self-employment, you can ask your credit card companies if they have financial hardship programs. And you don't have to say like, oh, I lost my job or anything like that. You just report it as like a change in income, because usually when you first switch over to self-employment, you're not making as much money as you were with your 9-to-5. You might still be making good money, but you may not be making as much money. And so therefore you can tell them like, hey, temporarily, can you stop my payments or reduce my payments or something like that? They'll usually ask you a couple of questions, and then they'll decide like, oh, yes, we can lower your rate, or we can, we can give you a month free or whatever. And even if you don't think you need this, because I, wouldn't have said that I needed this, again, any money that you can save in the beginning will just go such a long way in the long run, because there's so many like unexpected expenses, because I've never run a business full time for myself before. Even if you've been like an admin for a business and you have like a general idea of what goes into a business, you don't really know 100% until you are the person in charge of all of the bills that your business accrues. Even something as simple as like unexpectedly getting a parking ticket while being a vendor at an event can really set you back. And so, by the way, that really happened to me. And so, like anything that you can do to give yourself more of a savings and having more money on standby while you're adjusting and trying to figure out like what kinds of expenses your business is accruing, it's going to help you tremendously. So it's something that I'd recommend. The other thing for debts is like if you have student loan debts, which I will have for the rest of my life probably, but if you do have student loan debts, and I know this might sound crazy because like, working is already its own kind of like job, but I would recommend taking classes, and literally just like 2 classes. They could be fully online, doesn't really matter. But signing up for classes, because if you are in school, at least part-time, which is usually 6 credits or 2 classes per semester, then you can ask the government to delay when you have to pay back your loans. You can tell them like, hey, I'm in school right now, so I don't owe you anything on these loans. And they will usually say, okay. And not only will I say, okay, but also 6 months after you're done with school, you will also still not have to pay anything on these loans. So you can save quite a bit of money like that. Now, because, going back to school is a lot of work, I would recommend picking classes that are relevant to your small business. So building the skills that you can actually use. So for me, I have signed up for an animation class, because animation is something that I really want to get into at some point for my business, not for me working for someone else. But also I've taken a social media marketing class. So social media is obviously super, super big in this day and age. And I am really not a super social person. So I need all the tips that I can get as far as like how to be an effective social media marketer. And so I'm taking a class on it. So I signed up for class. So it doesn't have to be a useless class, like a filler class, but it can be like if you just want to practice your art, or if you just want to, a class on like nutrition, or, whatever is like fun or interesting to you, doesn't really matter. But just sign up for 2 classes at your local community college. It's super cheap. And I promise you it's a lot cheaper than paying student loan back. So for me, to sign up for classes at my local community college, it was $360. So $360. But that's for the whole semester. And I get a whole year of not having to pay student loans. So obviously I don't know what your student loan payments are, but if they are anything like mine, you are saving significantly more money by just paying up front for a class rather than trying to pay your student loans each month. And again, I do all these things not to say that like, oh, I couldn't have afforded it, but your money just will last a lot longer, any savings that you have, if you're not also paying for all of these debts at the same time. So those are sort of like my pieces of advice related to debts that you might be managing as you're thinking about switching to full-time self-employment. But just to recap, for your debts, doing refinancing, so trying to get interest rates as low as possible. If you have a bunch of different debts, doing debt consolidation, so combining them into just one debt, or just like 1 or 2 debts that you can pay off, can make things a lot easier. Don't do that for your student loans though, because for your student loans, all you have to do is actually just go back to school. Go back to school, and then they can be paused for up to a year just because you took 2 classes one semester. So it just makes a big difference for you financially as far as how much money you can save if you do these things. And then the other thing is just like if you are switching to full-time self-employment, the moment that you make that switch, just letting the credit card companies know that there has been a change in your income and that you will need some kind of like support for like hardship or, financial inconvenience. So just like lowered payments or a stop in payments altogether. So that's 2 things now. So we talked about timing, we talked about debts. The next thing that I want to talk to you all about is like managing your stress and energy levels. So specifically, um, a lot of people want to be self-employed because they are trying to get away from their stressful, frustrating jobs and be their own boss, being the master of their own, being the master of their own future. And I think those things are definitely true, like 100% true. And I definitely feel less stressed, and I am a lot more in control of my time and my energy. But there are also things that you need to be mindful of to make sure that you are maintaining that lower stress, sort of healthier environment that you're trying to push for. So we're going to talk about that next. Being self-employed is not necessarily less stressful. It's just differently stressful. And I think it's a stress that like you might be more comfortable with. So it'll feel less stressful. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but basically, so before I quit my 9-to-5 job, the things that stressed me out were things like certain coworkers really used to get on my nerves, didn't like working with them. Fortunately, not so much on my direct team, but in other departments that I had to regularly interact with, there are some people who really, really got on my nerves. And I really, it was one of those things where it's like, you hate to see them come in type thing. But then also there's things like occasionally a customer might be frustrating if you work in a job that works with customers, or most often for me, it was actually my manager and people in leadership who I felt were making really stupid decisions. And I get really frustrated when people's stupid decisions impact me and my life and the work that I'm trying to do. Especially if they made that stupid decision without actually talking to me and they're just like, hey, I made a decision, but now you have to live with the consequences. Things like that like really, really annoyed me. And I would come home and I'd be just really, really angry, really irritated. The people in my house, like they knew, certain names at work. They knew who this person was because they were like, regularly raising my blood pressure. My blood pressure was actually literally getting high. I went to the doctor and the doctor was a little bit concerned because she was like, hey, what you got going on? Your blood pressure is really, really high. We might want to put you on some medication or something like that. And actually it had gotten to the point to where I was starting to have chest pains like a day or two before I quit my job, which is why I actually quit really suddenly, is because like once I noticed that it was impacting physically my body, like I said, I'm not really patient as a person, and I could have like gone to a doctor and like, go on the whole route of like, trying to get my job to change the situation, but I just don't have patience for that. The moment that I feel like you are impacting me and my health and how I'm making it through this world, that's it. Our relationship is over. Goodbye. And so yeah, so I quit the job like literally 2 days after I started having chest pain. And that's just me. Obviously not everybody's like that, and that's totally okay. But anyway, all that to say, I had very valid reasons for why I was tired of working for the people. I had already decided before this that I was going to work for myself full time, but that really just like accelerated the process. Where I was like, I can't let y'all be affecting me and my health and my stress and my energy like this. So these things are important context. And all that to say that like working for myself full time, I would say is less stressful, but it doesn't mean that there's not stress. It's just differently stressful. So now most of the things that I'm stressing about is the fact that I don't always know what I'm doing. There's a lot of things that, I was not responsible for. When you work for someone in a company, you usually have a very specific job that you're doing with that company. So for example, if you're an accountant, you're just doing the accounting stuff. I worked in customer education. So I did customer education stuff. And that doesn't mean that like sometimes they wouldn't give me like extra work, but it was still usually at least somewhat related to customer education. So, for example, I did video editing so that we could do like training videos for customers, or I did like, planning like conventions and things like that. So we could teach customers like on a larger scale, just planning webinars, like just all kinds of stuff, so like there's a variety of skills that I did pick up. But at the end of the day, they were still directly related to the job that I was being paid to do, either directly or indirectly. Sometimes they'd have me do stuff that was like a little bit less directly related. But they could spin it enough to be like, well, it's kind of related because blah, 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 blah. So yeah, there's stuff like that. But now, because I work for myself, I do everything. I do, the art, of course, because this is an art business. But I also do the video editing if there is any, and then I also do and I also do the video editing, but I also now have to do like sales, right? I was never a salesperson before. Sales is like my least favorite thing, but I have to be the salesperson now. And I'm also doing accounting, and I'm also doing, if I ever have to hire someone, I'd have to do like the hiring process. I'm looking at like grant applications now, so I'm doing like grant writing. Like there's so much stuff now that I was not responsible for before, so I'm having to sort of learn as I go. And that has definitely been like its own kind of stress. I'm stressing because I'm like, I don't even know where to look to get certain information. I don't know who I should be trusting for this kind of information. There's like, what are the consequences if I do this wrong with things like, like your taxes and stuff like that, your business licenses, making sure all of your documents are up to date. Luckily, some of the stuff I had already started before I quit because, like I said, I was already sort of part-time self-employed. This is just me sort of transitioning to doing it full-time. So it wasn't like completely going in blind. But that step up to full-time definitely makes a difference as far as like the amount of things you're responsible for and just like how much energy and time that stuff takes up. So that's something I hadn't really anticipated in advance. So it brings its own kind of stress. There's also like positive stress sometimes. So things like you may not sleep as well because you are getting ideas and inspiration constantly. So you get this kind of like boost of energy when you quit your 9 to 5 and switch to doing your business full time, because you can give all of the energy that you had been giving to someone else and their job. And now you can give it to something that you're actually passionate about. And that will definitely like show up as far as like, how much energy you have and like how many ideas you have. But there's like an adjustment period where like I just wasn't sleeping really well for a while because I was so excited about all these ideas that I had to put in place, or that I wanted to put in place, and like what that required, like updating my website and having new products and new ideas and like video ideas and events that I wanted to go to. Like there's so much new stuff now that I'm really excited about, but all of that stuff takes energy. And so it's just something that you really need to be mindful of like making sure that you're practicing really good self-care habits, ideally before you quit your job, so that once you do quit your job, you're still already in the habit of those things. But even if not, just being really mindful that like when you switch to being full-time self-employed, that you are still making time to rest. Rest is really, really important. And just because you're working for yourself does not mean that you're not working. So just being really mindful about your energy levels and making sure that you still take days off, which I'm not doing. I'm not very good about doing that, but I'm working on it. So yeah, that's just something that I would encourage you to keep in mind as you're planning to transition to being a full-time self-employed person. The other thing, which is kind of related to energy, is trying to make sure that you are not trying too hard to be someone that you're not, because that will drain your energy in its own kind of way. So especially like because in the beginning, you'll still be trying to like, maybe you had some customers before you transition to being self-employed, but you will definitely need to get more customers if you're going to be doing this full time, right? If this is now your sole job and this is like all that you're doing in your life, you will need enough customers or income. I guess it doesn't have to necessarily be customers depending on the kind of business that you have, but you'll need enough income to make sure that you can do this sort of sustainably. And sometimes you'll be tempted to change like who you are or what you like or what you offer to try to like entice in more people. And not to say that that's a bad thing, but it's like, if it's something that you would not have done or like doesn't actually align with what you want, don't do that. And there's a couple products that like people are like, oh, you should definitely do this. And I'm like, I don't know why I would offer that, because that's something that I don't like and I would never use. Or they're like, oh, you should get into this kind of art. And I'm like, that doesn't really align with my brand. Or even when it comes to like videos, like a lot of artists that I know, when they do videos for social media, like their nails are done and they've got their makeup and their hair is super pretty. And I'm not going to do that. Like I had to make a decision for myself that that's not me. And it's important that you make those decisions about like what is and is not you pretty early on, because trying to be someone else is really tiring. And so if I want to be someone who is consistent, which is the important thing, I want to be consistent in showing up every single day, day in, day out, to make this money, but also just to develop the kind of business that I want. if I want to be consistent, then I have to be showing up in a way that I know I can consistently show up every day. So if I know that I can consistently show up in a gray shirt and with my hair in braids and, my hands are clean, right? Maybe minus some ink or something like that. But if I'm clean and not grimy and, pleasant at the very least, that's good enough for me. I do not need to be, also I'm 32, right? I'm 32 years old. I don't need to be dressing up cute for anybody. I got a man, I'm good. If you are coming to me for my art or my business advice or for something like that, then what I look like should not abundantly matter. Now, obviously, if I'm like at an event or something like that, I might look a little bit, put a little bit more effort into it. But I work at home. I work at home full time by myself. And so I'm really only dressing to impress myself. And so that's just something to keep in mind as you are, thinking about like what is authentic to you. Because if you are being authentic to yourself, then you can keep doing this for a long time. And ultimately, that's what we want. We want our businesses to last for a long time. So that, this is a job that we can sort of keep and is sustainable. All right. That's a lot of rambling, but just to recap, the two main things when it comes to your stress and energy levels. The first is that you will not necessarily have less stress when you switch to being full-time self-employed. So keep that in mind. But it's different stress, and it's stress that you are in control of and that you can decide like how you're going to navigate it, what you're going to prioritize, things like that. So you are in control of your stress. And I think that makes a big difference for me, at least. The other thing is that you want to be authentic to yourself. You do not want to try overly hard to present how other people are presenting. You want to present like you, both because that actually helps with managing your stress levels, but also that's how you get to be your own unique person. You are your own unique brand. This is your brand. And your brand is based around you. Who are you? So it's really important to be authentic when you are coming to work each day, because you are still coming to work. And that's related to the last thing, actually, which is your relationships with people. And this one is kind of an interesting one because your relationships with people, I won't say that they'll change, but they do become really interesting, I think, when you become self-employed. So we're going to talk about that. That's sort of like the last thing that we'll talk about as I am finishing up this picture. So your relationships with people will change. And this is not necessarily in a bad way, but it does sort of help you realize stigmas or like stereotypes maybe that people have in their minds that they may not even realize. And I've talked to other people who are self-employed and I've heard similar sort of things, but one kind of really odd thing that happens when you switch to being self-employed full-time is that some people in your life will perceive that as you being unemployed. So rather than you working for yourself, if you are not working for a 9-to-5 corporation, some people just think that you are not working. And this has been like actually probably one of the most frustrating things about being self-employed is like people in my family being like, oh, so are you still unemployed? And I'm like, I was never unemployed. At no point in time was I unemployed. Or some people in my life being like, oh, what does your partner think about having to pay for all the bills now? And I'm like, he doesn't. I pay for all my own bills just like I did before. And with our mortgage, our house, like he still covers, or like I still cover my half of it. Like nothing has changed financially between me and my partner since I switched to being full-time self-employed. So I think part of it is because I'm doing art as a business, right? So with art in particular, people really have this mindset of like starving artists, not making any money, broke. You are not working. This is not a real job. But yeah, it's really frustrating. And one of the reasons in particular is because people will then start to feel the need to quote unquote help you. So like things that they probably wouldn't have thought too deeply about before. Now all of a sudden they're like, oh, let me buy groceries for you. Or, my mom, for whatever reason, insisted on coming over to my house and making dinner one night randomly. And, you might be like, oh my God, that's super thoughtful of her, so considerate. But she has never, not to say that she doesn't come over and cook sometimes. We do have like family dinners or whatever. But sometimes my partner, the person who actually lives here, will cook. Or two, it's usually like to celebrate something in particular, like someone's birthday or a holiday or to watch a particularly interesting like football game. But she just came over on like a random Thursday and was like, oh, I'm going to make dinner for you. And I actually was really tired because I had had events the whole weekend before, or the whole week before, and I didn't want anybody over because I wanted time to rest and recover. But here is someone forcing their way into my house out of some misguided concern. And it's really frustrating to deal with. Even people who are like normally super supportive in my family, like my grandmother, and not to say that my mom is not supportive, but she's always a mom, so she's always concerned about the well-being of her children. But even people like my grandmother who've like, she's actually owned her own small business before. But she's just like, oh, how has it been with your job search? And I'm like, I'm not searching for a job. So, it's been non-existent. Or she's like, can you still afford to do X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, my finances are not dramatically different. Like, yes, I don't have a set like 9-to-5 job where I get like a regular paycheck, but I'm still making money, so it's just like, you have to be willing to deal with some of the, I'll just say misguided concern from people around you. Now, what's funny about this is that random strangers are actually more supportive and excited about this than my family is. Like when I'm at events and people are like, oh, like, do you do this full-time, part-time? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've been doing this full-time as of blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh my God, congratulations. Like they're so excited. But family is just like concerned. And even my partner, like he's been very supportive throughout this whole process. But when I first told him that I was going to do it, he was really concerned. But he was concerned more so because like we have a lot of bills in common. Like we own a house together, and he's like, but are you still going to be able to pay that mortgage? Because like I don't want to be homeless type stuff. But once I assured him like, no, I do have this money. We talked about my finances, and he's the only person that I've had like such an honest conversation about my finances with, because it impacts him too. But for everybody else, like it's really not their business. Like as long as I don't, I'm not going around like asking them for help or for money or anything like that. It shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it is something that you might deal with from people around you. And even when I was talking to like other business owners in other industries, like I was even talking to my therapist actually, who is also self-employed. And she was just saying that like, once she switched to being her own private practice, a lot of people in her family just started calling her randomly in the middle of the workday because they're like, oh, you're unemployed. You have time to talk to me about random, not really particularly important things. And she's like, no, actually, I'm still working. I'm with a client actually right now. This is not a good time. And no, I can't go hang out with you, or I can't go to brunch with you. Right. So one of the things anyway, these are just my complaints. Sorry. But the important thing here is that you are going to need to set boundaries with the people in your life. When you have a 9-to-5 job, that boundary is like automatically implied. I am going to be somewhere where I'm working from 9 to 5. So people genuinely sort of naturally do not bother you unless it's terribly important. However, when you're working for yourself, especially if you work from home and, you have, a little bit more control over your schedule, people will just assume that you are just not working. And there will be like a lot of assumptions on like either you're just not doing anything with your time, or you're impoverished, or, like whatever. So like, just be mindful that there will be a lot of assumptions about what you have going on with your life once you switch to being self-employed full-time. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do anything different. It just means that like when people call you at certain times, let them know that like I'm working, I'm busy, I'm not available. Or when people are like, oh, can you afford this? And you can just be like, oh, I've never had an issue affording it before. So just, expect, I guess, that these things might happen. And just like being, I don't know, firm maybe with the people in your life. Nothing has changed. Not really. The main difference is that I'm just not working for someone else. I'm working for myself. Right. But I'm always the person who's going to grind. I am still working. I'm still doing, my best, whatever your best is. But yeah, just something to keep in mind there. And throughout all of these sorts of things that you might be dealing with, the most important thing is, again, just making sure that you are taking care of yourself. The reason that I'm sharing these things with you is, again, it's not stopping me from doing anything that I didn't know this stuff in advance. But if you are thinking about switching to being self-employed full-time, any information that you know in advance is helpful. And so I'm just trying to share this information while I can so that y'all don't have to make the same mistakes that I do. I want to do like a little highlight on her. So, but yeah, wrap up this picture and also wrap up this video. But I hope that this advice was sort of helpful to you as far as like knowing like what. Sorry. But yeah, anyway, I hope this video was helpful to you. This is about, that's pretty much all I want to tell you for today. If any of these things are interesting to you and you want to know more about them, feel free to, comment and let me know, and I'm happy to talk in more detail about any of these things. But yeah, but I hope this was helpful. Again, my name is Tori. I'm a small business owner. I run an art business and print shop called My Territory. If you are someone who likes to color like I do, because I do, again, find coloring super therapeutic, you can find this coloring page and a bunch of other ones on my website. So just to recap the whole thing, in case you kind of just skip to the end, the timing of when you quit or get fired is really, really important, especially for things like healthcare. You want to make your money last as long as you can. Any debts that you have, make sure that you get them as small and as sort of like consolidated as possible, get the interest rates as low as possible because it'll make repayment a lot easier. But also if you can try to get, if you can try to get your payments like paused or reduced temporarily while you're transitioning, because you don't know what unexpected expenses will come up while you are switching to being self-employed full-time. And if you have student loans, go back to school. Go back to school, get a year of loan-free learning, at least, and learn some skills that are relevant to your business, because running a business can still be stressful. It may not be stressful in the same way that your 9-to-5 job was, but it is still stressful because there's a lot of things that you have to learn, new skills that you have to pick up, new responsibilities that you have to take on that you've never done before. And so just allowing yourself some grace and making sure that you get the support that you need so that when you are doing this transition, it's not that bad. But also try to be as authentic to yourself as possible. Make sure that when you show up to work, it is a low energy, like it doesn't take as much energy to show up to work each day so that you can consistently show up to work each day. Because when you are working for yourself, you are still working. I don't care what your family says. I don't care what people around you say. This is still a job. You are doing a full-time job. In fact, you might be working more hours now that you work for yourself versus what you were doing before. So again, just make sure that you are being protective of your energy and of yourself. Making sure that you are setting boundaries with people around you. And ultimately, like if you can, just try to have patience, both with yourself, but also with others around you, because it's new. This is a new thing that you are doing, and there's a learning curve for everybody involved, including the people in your life. So yeah, those are things that I wish that I knew before quitting my job and becoming a full-time artist or before becoming a full-time business owner. I do have other tips and tricks, but also like if there are things that I talked about today that you are interested in and you want to know more details about, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to talk about them in more detail. So yeah, I will catch you in the next one.